Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Constructive Criticism. I'm your host, Spencer, and I'm joined by my co-host, Michael.
Everyone, and how's it going?
And I'm joined by a special guest, two-time Pro Tour topic competitor, one Worlds, one Pro Tour, Conley Woods.
Howdy.
Would you say that you're the man that perfected tempered steel?
I don't know if that's true. I mean, I played tempered steel too, but there was 4 of us in that top 8 that played tempered steel, so I don't know if I can claim perfection over it, since basically all of the Channel Fireball crew at that time was playing tempered steel. But yeah, I definitely had some success with it.
So, really quick for the listeners, you've since kind of you've since accepted a full-time job, but you are pretty famous for your brews in history. Whether it's I think you are the one that made Acidic Slime a popular card, as well as I think Abyssal Persecutor is another one that you were pretty big on.
Yep.
When you think about your success early in Magic, for me as somebody who was kind of getting into competitive Magic at that time, I look at you and Josh Layton as kind of the driving force between a lot of innovation behind the first super team. And do you feel some of that when you think about your Magic career?
To a certain degree, yes. I mean, most of a large part of my career definitely was coupled with Team Channel Fireball and their results. So I definitely had some impact there. But Josh certainly had more of an impact in the team environment, just because he tended to kind of work on ideas that were more well suited for a team to play as their deck, whereas oftentimes I kind of had to go do my own thing or kind of go alone, especially before Channel Fireball, obviously. But even afterwards, sometimes I would veer off and kind of do my own thing if I wasn't confident in the team deck or whatever. And sometimes I played the team deck as well. But I would say overall, I probably helped more by giving them a different perspective that they didn't already have. So I was able to kind of open up their range a little bit and open up the types of opponents they might play against and bring up feedback that other people weren't doing. But I was not necessarily the type of person to create the deck that the entire team played. I did for a couple tournaments, but often that was somewhere where Raptor would excel a little bit more.
Okay. Well, we're very excited to have you on, especially on the topic that we're talking about today. Today we'll be talking about brewing in a new format, which Conley is going to be a huge help for us on that. Let's go right into our first. We just want to remind everybody about our sponsors. Don't forget to check out the Mana Base and Oasis Games. Oasis Games is an amazing place to buy Magic the Gathering singles. You can check them out at oasisgamesslc.com. You can get 15% off of your first order by using the code CCMTG at checkout. You can get 4% off of every order by using the code Would That Be Good with no spaces. That's Would That Be Good. And Michael works at Oasis Games, so you're just supporting him in his life. But also, they're just an amazing place to buy Magic cards. I'm very good friends with the owner. He's an amazing guy. He's been on the Pro Tour for years. We really, really love Alex, and if you are going to support somebody, he's definitely a guy to support. Don't forget to check out the Man Base, though. They have an up-and-coming Magic content, whether it's Nikachu doing Merfolk or us trying to make these podcasts for every week between constructive criticism and limited time only. We really appreciate the support by going to that website. And Fusion Gaming, who sponsors them, has sealed product which you can buy, which Oasis Game doesn't offer. So check them out at Fusion Gaming and the Mana Base. Quick update. I want to just kind of remind people that while constructive criticism is a podcast that we love to do, there's also limited time only, the podcast about getting better at Magic in a limited sense that we do every week. And we are starting Common Knowledge, which is a podcast about getting better with a focus on Pauper play. And with Pauper having these awesome tournaments every weekend on Magic Online, it's a great time to get into Pauper, trying to become competitive in it. So check that out. We have some special shout outs this week. So, one of the things that we really appreciate is our patrons. And every week we like to give them a shout out on the show for the new ones that come in and donate to us. So I would like to give a shout out to Timothy B. I'm going to say Aiden's name wrong, but I think it's Aiden P. and Chris V. All of you, every dollar that's donated is really appreciated. If every listener of the show just donated $1 per month, Michael, myself, and Danny could all quit our jobs and just do Magic content full time And what you guys are doing in helping us achieve that goal is bringing us closer to going to more GPs and bringing you better Magic content. So we really appreciate it. So thank you to all of you. One of the benefits of being a patron of the show is actually asking questions. So when we have a guest on like Conley, the questions get to go to Conley, which is really fun, and we're really excited about some of the questions that some of our listeners have asked. And the first question is from Adrian, who says, what advice, Conley, would you give to players who aren't naturally creative, who aren't great brewing decks for new standard formats?
Well, I personally am very naturally creative, so it's a little difficult for me to get into that mindset. But what I would, I actually kind of just wrote my article this week on a similar topic. What I would suggest is similar to what you might hear advice from a writer or a stand-up comic, which is sit down and brew. Don't wait for like walking around your everyday life waiting for that random idea to just come out of thin air and be like, oh, I got it. And then now you have your deck and you're going to work on it and whatever. Because while that might happen, you have no control over that. You're just going to walk around and randomly hope for this idea to pop up. What you need to do, just like if you were a writer, is you need to sit down and write. In this case, you need to sit down and brew. Sit down, open up your Magic Online, open up your Gather, whatever it is. Doesn't matter if you don't have an idea to start off with. It doesn't matter. Just get the tools in front of you to where your mental space is kind of focused on Magic, and then something will happen. Either you'll come across a card in Gather or whatever, you're like, oh, I didn't realize this, or you'll see a comment about a card and you're like, oh, this combo works like this, and now and all of a sudden you're off and running. And because you're in an environment that is conducive to brewing, and because it's there to kind of foster your ideas, you not only are you going to have that idea come to life, but you're then also going to probably start naturally tuning it, iterating on it on the spot. So then it becomes something that is you're much further along in the process, as opposed to, I think blue-white control would be kind of cool or whatever. Then you just put that in the back of your mind and move on with your life. When you do that, you're kind of haphazardly brewing, and it's not, you're never going to necessarily get to the spot you need to get to kind of master a new format. So what I would say is just like sit down, look at the new cards, check out forums, check out streams, do whatever you need to do to kind of kick that spark into gear, but make sure you're actually trying to do that and you're not just waiting for something to come out of thin air, because that's not going to happen.
And I think we'll cover a lot of what Conley just said a little bit during the training grounds too, because that's kind of what the training grounds is about. And Gatherer, I think, and forums and things like that are going to cover a lot in that. So thank you so much. Adrian also wants to know, what are the signs that let you know you're on the right MTG team that is right for you? What are the signs that let you know the MTG team that you're on isn't right for you? So kind of like a two-sided question. Like, how do you know when it's right and when it's incorrect?
Well, I think the most important thing is that you feel comfortable and that you feel accepted by your team, because a team environment is a spot where you're going to be receiving a lot of constructive criticism, and you're going to, you're literally going up and battling these guys and winning or losing all the time, and then emotions get high and egos get high and whatnot. So if you don't feel comfortable or you don't feel like you can be open and stuff with your teammates, that's sign number one that you're not in the right spot. So I would say first and foremost is kind of make sure you're comfortable, but also make sure that you're pushing yourself. You don't want to be comfortable because you're the best guy in the group and everybody else just kind of falls in line and does what we need them to do, because then you're not pushing yourself and becoming better. So at some point you might need to graduate teams. You might need to surround yourself with just better players because you kind of outpaced everyone else. That could happen. But you want to surround yourself with players who are about your skill level or a little bit better, generally speaking, and you want to make sure you're comfortable and fostering a good environment, and you're open to new ideas and you're open to testing. And of course you actually want this team to be, if you're actually wanting to be good at Magic, you need this team to be a Magic team. You need them to kind of like play Magic. It can't just be like a group of friends who sometimes go to the movies. Sometimes that's fine if you want to be friends with your team. Obviously you should be, but you need to, if your goal is to get better at Magic, you need to make sure that like Magic is your priority with those guys or girls.
I think this is Michael. I think we both have something to say on this. But I for one have, and we'll get to this during our always improving segment. But I for one have felt the problem that comes with getting a group of friends together and making a Magic team. So I've actually gone out and actively looked for an online testing team to complement my local testing team. And I think what Conley is saying is right. You want people that are better than you, but also You want them with the same mindset. You want them with similar goals. And I think it's also unfair to expect people of certain backgrounds that don't have the same background as you at the current time to do things that you want to do, right? Like, I want to test online in a certain time. Well, guess what? Like, I'm the only Magic player probably in Salt Lake that has a specific time that they can play test. So it's unfair of me to expect Salt Lake players to play test at that time. It's unfair of me to expect them to go to all the tournaments I go to. It's just unfair. So you kind of have to shape around like what is realistic for you too, rather than just your friends. Because guess what? You're gonna make friends with people who don't work 9 to 5s when you work 9 to 5s. They're not gonna want to go to Worlds is not going to be their goal if Worlds is your goal all the time because people are different. They're in different places, and it's very unlikely that the small group of people that are local to you are also all trying to achieve the same goal.
Yeah, I really like the point about trying to sort of find balance between finding people who make you feel comfortable and pushing your own boundaries. In that, you know, you need people who you can respect and who respect you, but at the same time, you also need to be with a group of people who don't only make you feel comfortable because they're unwilling to give you difficult feedback.
I think that for the top end of our testing team too, like I feel pretty comfortable with Michael and Alex and Matt telling them like what I'm thinking. But if you're not comfortable with that, right? Like if you don't feel that, that's a problem. Like if you don't feel like, if I don't feel like I can go up to, we'll use Austin because apparently I cyberbully him, right? If I don't feel like I can be like, Austin, you played too much control. I need you to play something else. Otherwise, your feedback is not as relevant to me. If I don't feel comfortable doing that, then that's a problem for our team. I've never once cyberbullied Mason, which is a comment that's currently going on Twitch. But I think this is important because what Conley's talking about is like this constructed criticism, easy mistake. It's like our podcast is named that for a reason. But yeah, I think that what Conley said there is completely correct. Like you have to have this like radical candor available for you in your testing team. Jared wants to know, Conley. He says, "What's the steps for learning a new unfamiliar format? For example, standard right after rotation. Secondly, would you give advice to a tier 1.5 to 2 deck in modern that you're really familiar with and love to go for over a tier 1 deck with little to no experience?"
All right, well, I'll answer the second question first. I think specifically when we're talking about modern, I would definitely err on the side of playing something you love and are very familiar with, even if you don't view it as quite as well. I've lost to plenty of Martyr of Sands, Norn the Wary decks online that, you know, if you ask me if you should take that to a tournament, I would never tell you yes because you have so many terrible matchups. But you know the people know their deck; it's all foiled or whatever, and they know it in and out. They have a good sideboard. They know all their matchups, and like that, especially in a format as big as Modern, is way more important to me than you showing up with a tier 1 list that you're going to play poorly and fetch out the wrong lands and not have the right mana on turn 3 and use your Liliana incorrectly and all the stuff that can go wrong. Because in Standard you can get away with a few more mistakes, but in Modern you're talking about shorter game lengths, so every individual decision tends to matter more. And so knowing what you're doing and playing something that you know and love, I would definitely recommend that over the other. That's basically how I made my career, was just playing things that I felt comfortable with versus whatever the best deck was. And then what was the first question? I talked so long, I forgot what
No,
exploring
okay.
a new format?
Yeah. We're going to get into that, so like don't feel you have to go too deep on it, but...
Okay, I would say the big thing for exploring a new format is, first of all, you have data. So in terms of the best decks, people are going to be discovering those for you. You almost don't even need to make a real effort into it. If you just wait a couple weeks, there's so much data out there. You can kind of be like, okay, here's the foundational pillars of the format. But then if I were you, I would just explore ideas, chase ideas. If there's something that excites you in the new set, just see if there's anything that you can do with it. Don't necessarily try to do everything that everyone else is already doing for you, because like I said, if you just give it a little bit of time, they're going to do all that hard work for you. And then you could be like, oh, I like this deck that Joe Schmo made and is doing really well, or I like this blue-white monument deck, or whatever the particular deck is. The pillars of the format tend to kind of fall into place really quickly. This particular format might be the exception to that because it's a little chaotic right now, but we'll see.
Cool. The last question, and one that I'm sure you knew you're going to be asked, is after you play land, crack, fetch, and take two, do you say I'm Conley Woods in a real match, or is that just when memeing?
No, that was I never actually said that. Basically, what happened was it's a long story, but essentially, I was playing for top 8 of Worlds 2009, and I was playing Zoo and was up against a mono red player. The mono red player mulliganed to 3, and this was an extended. Modern was not around yet, and I ended up. Zoo was famous for taking some damage from its lands because all of its mana was fetches and shocks. So I ended up dealing a total of about 5. I think it was 5 or 6 damage in a game that he mulliganed to 3, thinking that I was going to kill him on turn 4 and it was going to be over. And then he ended up having a sequence of like lightning bolt, shrapnel blast, lightning bolt or something to kill me, plus the Hellspark elemental that got in earlier. So he beat me on a mulligan to 3. And it was pretty embarrassing. And then after that, Gerard Fabiano began telling the story in a very hyperbolic, accentuated way, and he would do it at all the tournaments. And he would be like, and then he would like act as me, and he'd be like, then I was like, crack, fetch, take 2, play Dark Confidant. Necropotence for 10, like doing all these ridiculous things that were like, double Thoughtseize myself, and like just everything you could do to damage yourself or whatever. And he would just like ham it up and go really over the top. But land, crack, fetch, take 2, I'm Conley Woods kind of like stuck out of that. And so people say it all the time thinking that I said it, even though I never really said it. But now I kind of just play into it and
you just own it.
Give the people what they want.
I mean, being a meme means you made it, Conley. That's the thing that means you made it. Just ask Manny Merez. We have Michael here, who's literally a goat token for actual no reason.
That's fair. I've gotten a couple of memes out there. I have the "Come at me, bro" meme that everyone tweets at me all the time, still to this day. So it's good times.
So if you want to be the one that asks questions to our guests, you can go to patreon.com/ccmtg, become a patron of the show. Every dollar is really appreciated. It actually does mean the world to us. So, and if you are a patron of $5 or more per month, you get to be one of our constructed critics. And that gives you access to early testing. It's really funny. Today I was like, man, we haven't posted anything for this Pro Tour, but also we don't have anything for this Pro Tour. So it's like all these people were like, yeah, I want to see your early results. It's like, that's great. Also, this format is crazy.
Yeah, that's great. Do you have any tips?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Michael and Danny are like, so tell us what you think.
Right.
Because we don't know right now. But yeah, so thank you so much to our patrons. Let's go into our first segment of the show that is not based around our patrons, which is always improving, and talk about the things that we're doing to improve at Magic. So every week on the show, we like to reflect personally, because we believe if you're not getting better, you're getting worse. We want to be doing what we can each week to try and improve ourselves, because honestly, Magic's really hard. Despite what some of the up-and-coming F&M players will tell you, the better you get, the worse you are, because you realize that you're really bad at Magic. And so, Michael, what have you done this week to try and improve so that you aren't as bad as Magic as you were last week?
Yeah, man, it's depressing when you put it that way.
And also, going to this Pro Tour, you might also be like, nothing. I feel nothing.
Well, I don't know that I feel anything right now. I've spent all day basically playing against almost exclusively mono red online.
Yeah.
And I'm about ready to kind of phone in constructed here for a day or two and just keep drafting, because
it's actually funny. I wonder if other people are feeling the same thing you're feeling, right? So last Pro Tour, Paulo wrote that article that's like, maybe super teams are dead because Moto comes out early. But the thing is that when mono red is inexpensive and actually decent, it just takes up a large percentage of the Moto metagame. And because of that, you don't actually get accurate data anymore. So all of a sudden it goes from I can use this data to supplement my Pro Tour test into this data is actually maybe a little bit worthless.
Yeah, it's interesting. Mono red is funny in that it's very good at times, but I still kind of can't shake the feeling that the deck can't really beat Thraben Inspector, which just scares me on sort of a fundamental level. So just been trying to play standard, and when I get sick of that, drafting and just trying to get ready. That's about it.
It's like a cycle.
Yeah, exactly.
So for me, I kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier. I'm starting a new testing team. Not to get away from my current testing team. I love Michael. I love Danny. I love all these awesome silver pros that I'm surrounded by. I say silver because like the season's not over yet, and I like to call Michael a fool's gold pro, which means that he's going to explore this pro tour and get gold. But yeah, I like the team that I'm around. But like I kind of mentioned earlier, they're not really on the same schedule as me, right? Michael works at Oasis Games where he kind of gets to sleep whenever he wants. I work a real job where I have to like do specific things. And so because of that, I need people around me that can test with me that I trust. Like it's important to me that I can trust my results. I can go to my other team and this team and kind of get better together. So because of that, if you are in my position where you like need a testing team, specifically on Cockatrice and Magic Online, message me. Let me know. I want to talk to you. And the other thing that I did this week is I tried really hard to keep an open mind. And here's one of the reasons. I don't know if this stat is still true, but if I'm not mistaken, Michael, Matt Kling, and myself have never lost to Blue White Monument on MTGO. Is this stat still true for you, Michael?
Probably not, but
is it close to true still?
It probably is. It's certainly not a deck that I feel like I've seen a lot of on Magic Online.
Well, recently probably true.
Yeah.
But one thing that came of this week is I really wanted to look at this format with fresh eyes. So like, what's going on? What are people playing? And not think anything is just bad off the bat. Because something that I think that Magic players often do is they'll see a list, like, that's bad, not playing that, don't do that. And what I want to do is, like, why did the player come to the conclusion that they came to, and what can I learn from this person? Because that's way more powerful than me just dismissing anything, right? The number of times that I lost to Rite of Replication Acidic Slime in FNM is probably way too high. Thanks, Conley. And I think that if you aren't willing to accept the fact that maybe some cards that you weren't open to were good, one of the cards, what's the 3-drop that's a 1/2 that makes them discard? Or is it a 2/3?
Dream Stealer. I actually just published a deck list for him about him last weekend.
So every time that card was on camera, I believe the player playing it won the match this weekend. Like,
I think that card is absurd. I've been a big fan of cards like that for a long time, and I think that there is so much awesome pump spells in the format to like Invigorated Rampage, Built to Smash, all kinds of like really good stuff. Obviously, there's green pump spells as well. I think that card is a big sleeper.
I think that when you are just like, this person's deck list is bad because it includes this card, you're not actually thinking like, why did they include this card? Probably like 30 episodes ago, I think we did an episode on watching coverage and like understanding coverage. And one of the things that I really preached was, don't watch coverage to look for their misplays. Watch coverage to understand their play patterns and why they think what they think, because you learn more that way. And that's kind of what I try to do this weekend.
I think it's important there actually it's about dropping your ego. When you're watching coverage and trying to find misplays, you're doing that to make yourself feel good. It's like, I'm smarter than this player. Look at this cool thing. That's not relevant. Like, finding some misplays because they are relevant to the outcome of the match and you would have done things differently, that's fine. But you should be looking at a match as a way for yourself to improve, not as a way for yourself to kind of validate how good you are, because you're not doing anything there.
I completely agree.
Yeah, and especially these first couple of weeks are always sort of interesting in that sense, right? In that you're seeing a lot of cards that maybe you haven't had a chance to play with very much, or that you haven't even seen in play very much, or even thought about very much sometimes. And
think of the number of players that are like seeing Elder Deep Fiend for the first time. Surprisingly, they're like, well, obviously you should have played around Elder Deep Fiend then. And it's like, well, this person maybe has never played against that card. Like, it hasn't been relevant for 2 years. Yeah, like obviously you know about that card because 2 years ago it was the bee's knees, but like, that's not true today. All of a sudden they ban all the cards that made Elder Deep Fiend bad, and all of a sudden you're seeing the cards. So like, you have to think, like, drop, kind of like what Conley said, right? Drop your ego and put yourself into like, Why do they think what they think? Why are they playing the cards that they're playing? And that's kind of what I tried to do this week. So, speaking of Elder Deep Fiend, I don't know that this card like naturally wins Card of the Week, but I think that the card's comeback makes it deserve Card of the Week. So, huge love it to Elder Deep Fiend for coming back. Michael and I both are huge fans of the card, so we're a little bit biased here. But I'm going to give a playset of Elder Deep Fiends to one of our patrons. First of all, Michael, are you so happy that like somebody was playing a Elder Deep Fiend prized amalgam deck in the top 8 of a tournament?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly love those Magic cards. They're really sweet. I've played decks like that when they're pretty bad, and then this one looks like it might actually be reasonable again. So, kind of excited to see that. Yeah, I mean, Elder Deep Fiend's what qualified me for my first Pro Tour, and
yeah,
I don't know. I love that card. It's really powerful.
Yeah, I think that figuring out like the combination of cards that could go together to make an Elder Deep Fiend deck great is really important. So Mad Hustle, we're going to give you a playset of Elder Deep Fiends. Please message me on Facebook or on Patreon, and we'll hook you up with a playset of that card and hopefully get you going in this new standard format, this brave new world where Elder Deep Fiend is playable again. So thank you so much. We're actually not going to spend too much time on Card of the Week this week. We just want to give those out and just mention that the card is back, ready to attack, and kind of go into our power rankings where we might get into Elder Deep Fiend a little bit. In fact, let's start with Emerge decks. So for those who don't know, the way that we do power rankings on the show is we give 6 points for first, 5 points for second, 4 for top 4, 3 for top 8, 2 for top 16, and 1 for top 32. When a top 64 is involved, we extend that 1 point down to the top 64. And this week, because the format was new, I combined a few different types of decks, and Emerge was one of them. So there were Rug decks, Blue-Red decks, and the 4-color deck. And these are all Elder Deep Fiend Emerge decks, and they combined for 8 points. Honestly, these decks are possible because of one card that isn't Elder Deep Fiend, but probably isn't worth as much as Elder Deep Fiend, which is why I didn't give it out. But Michael, why don't you talk really quickly about the new card making these Emerge decks possible?
Yeah, so Champion of Wits is really, really sweet. It slots in perfectly. I wouldn't say it's like really overpowered or anything, but it gives you both a body to emerge off of Elder Deep Fiend, helps you get a little bit deeper into the deck, helps you set up Delirium in the late game. It can come back, draw you a bunch of new cards. But really, the body and the draw and discard at the same time helps you find more copies of Prized Amalgam, puts Haunted Deads into the graveyard, all that kind of stuff. Just really nice fit.
Being a 3-drop too, it curves straight into the Emerge cost if you needed to.
Yep.
Not only that, but one of the things that myself too, are really worried about is that without Emrakul, which is what really pushed the Emerge decks over the top when they first came out, it's like how do I win games in the long game, right? And having this card come back as a 4/4 late in the game and filter through your deck for like more impressive cards is actually really important, I feel like.
Yeah, I think that's some of it. I think specifically in this 4-color deck, just like the ability to help you find more prized amalgams. Like you look at this deck in between Grimflayer, Champion of Wits, Vessel of Nice Sea, Grapple with the Past, Strategic Planning, and Traverse, you're actually just going to find a lot of prized amalgams in an average draw. And I think that if we're playing cards like Stitchwing Scab or Haunted Dead, it's really important that we're not just discarding 2 cards to set up a cheap Elder Deep Fiend, but that we're getting some sort of additional benefit on top of these to really go over the top of what our opponent's doing.
I really like that he made a very clear plan as what he was doing, right? Like, one of the things that I think that even myself, I suffer with in deck building is like, you start with 4 of everything you want, you start shaving things, right? Like, he started with 4 of everything you want, and then he cut, like, 2 cards, right? Like, he cut just some strategic plannings, and I was like, yeah, this is the deck. Like, here we go. Like, he very clearly has a plan, to the point where he's playing 4 Kozilek's Return, which kind of seems crazy when you like kind of think about the deck list that's on screen. Obviously, there were different decks, right? There's the UR Emerge decks that people love. There's the teamer merge decks that I find myself happy with, but the fact that he recognized that he was getting delirium enough that like Grimflare was a real card in his deck, I'm kind of just impressed with the is fortitude the right word I'm looking for here? Just understanding where your deck's at and what you can do to kind of maximize value.
Yeah, I think the flares are interesting. We haven't seen a lot of those in this style of deck, but they clearly go pretty well with both Kozilek's Return and Prize of Amalgam and Haunted Dead. Just really nice synergy and kind of fills a spot on the curve that was often lacking before.
Conley?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's probably also why I included a couple of strategic plannings, just to give himself something to do on turn 2 when he's not breaking a vessel. But yeah, I probably wouldn't have landed on this exact, all 4 of style, just because some of those sideboard options look pretty enticing as like maybe a 1 of somewhere in the deck, just to give you a little bit more versatility out of your graveyard since you're seeing so much of it. And remember, this is a deck that sees a lot of its decks, so you could afford to theoretically run a couple 1-ofs and they'd be much more reliable than not. But at the same time, early on in a format, when you don't necessarily know what those 1-ofs are supposed to be, you don't know what decks you're necessarily trying to hate out, I can see just going super consistent like this just being the correct call. But at the same time, in 2 weeks, it probably won't be the correct call to be doing this anymore. You probably want to have some tech cards in your deck.
And I think that the other decks, right, like this deck is kind of drawing a line in the sand, right? But I think that if you look at things like the teamer decks and the UR decks, they have previous information to go off of. Not that this deck didn't. Michael, if I'm not mistaken, this is pretty close to the deck you almost played in Portland 2 years ago or a year and a half ago.
About almost a year now.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean this list really looks a lot like they did. Like
the
right around,
Genesis
what
list,
Pro
right?
Tour was that?
Eldritch Moon.
Yeah, it was a PT Eldritch Moon. Yeah, there were a bunch of these that sort of came out of that Pro Tour. And honestly, it's a remarkably similar deck. I mean, I guess just Champion of Wits is basically replacing Jace Vryn's Prodigy in those decks.
Yeah, the difference here, a major difference here is that they're not playing main deck Descended Mind Menders. But
yeah, the mana doesn't. I don't know if the mana supports double black especially well in the early game. Just in general, I mean that's sort of the biggest issue with this deck and always has been, right? Your mana is really pushing it.
Coming up next, tied with this deck, we do have 8 points to Zombies deck. Weirdly though, I combined blue black and white black.
Okay.
So weirdly, there actually were blue black Zombies decks in this. The one that's going to be on your screen is actually going to be a blue black list also. I'm a little surprised here. Is this 5-mana zombie better, or not even zombie, it's a god, right? Is this 5-mana god actually better for your deck overall than the 5-mana enchantment? Is that what's going on here, Michael?
Conley, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that they serve different roles. I think the 5-mana enchantment is kind of your icing on the cake, your top. Like, sometimes you will come back from behind by playing it, but often you are casting it and getting in more damage and putting pressure on the board and doing that. This card, you can do that by just casting it because it has that huge life loss trigger and scry effect on it. But what it does better is going into the late game against some of these more controlling decks, like an Emerge deck or like a lot of the blue-white decks that are coming out, you can actually just take over a game where you not only have its reanimation ability, but you're also scrying and getting life loss. It's one of those cards where everything else can completely fall apart. You can get your entire plan, your graveyard exiled, and your creatures all fumigated and whatever, and then this card comes out of nowhere and it still says, hey, I'm a single must-deal-with card that was fine in your A plan, but is also just like great everywhere else.
One of the things here, Conley, that I think we would love for you to speak to is with the white-black version of the deck, like you had Wayward Servant, right, which is like this very early drop white creature, whereas the Scarab God is actually this very late card. Does that help your mana in a significant way?
Yeah, well, it definitely helps your mana. The Wayward Servant is kind of pushing a different narrative where it's going to help you out more against aggro and win races because it's got a little bit of life gain attached to it. It's a cheaper card. You're going to be exposed more to wrath effects and stuff like that by playing Wayward Servant. But it kind of does a different role and wants to come down early. So naturally, your mana is going to be a little bit worse. But you do pick up a creature land in the 2/3 lifelink. So, there's some give and take there.
Michael, as somebody who's like trying to prepare for this Pro Tour against a large variety of decks at this point, what is there a version of zombies that you're like, I need to be able to beat this version, and is it not mono black? Like, what are your thoughts right now?
I haven't, to be totally honest, I haven't played as much against zombies the last few weeks as I had in the period before that. It seems like maybe it dropped off a little bit. I think Kozilek's Turn is pretty good against basically all the zombie variants.
So between ramp and emerge, like you've kind of...
I think that emerge is kind of bad news for zombies as a general rule. I think that decks that can reliably cast the front side of Kozilek's Return and then get to the back side quickly and like more than once, like because the emerge decks can so frequently flip over 2 or 3 of them and over 3 or 4 turns flash Kozilek's Return over and over and over again.
Does that mean
it's just not very good against that style of?
Does that mean that the white version might be better going into the Pro Tour, or?
I think I would. I think ultimately, I haven't spent that much time playing zombies, but my feelings are kind of that zombies is a really good metagame deck, but I don't know that I would try to force it if I don't think it's there. I don't think that, like, ultimately you're still a deck that plays a lot of bears.
This is exactly how I feel about the deck. I think that, like, if the format is mono Mardu, which is what it has been in the past, zombies is this really good choice, right? Because they can't efficiently deal with your creatures. Whereas now we're in a format where it's not mono Mardu, and because of that, zombies loses a lot of equity. Speaking of which, let's go to our deck that got 10 points. None of them came from top 8s. This is a question that Michael actually asked in our testing group. It was like, where does Mardu end up at the end of this tournament? Like, it doesn't have any top 8s. It doesn't have a ton of top 16s. What does Mardu look like?
Well, it looks like it had, like, 2 top 16s and a 18th place. So, I mean, a pretty respectable finish, really, all things being equal.
Yeah, it had 3... sorry, I'm looking at the wrong deck. It had 2 2-point finishes and then a ton of 1s. But here's my thought, and maybe I'm wrong here. And I also hate Gideon, so I'll let my biases be known. That I think that Mardu, and this is something that I've noticed from recent playtesting from our team, is I think that Mardu gets most of its wins from people really, really understanding the deck and really playing the deck a lot and really knowing how to sideboard. And like they've gotten, what is it? When did Mardu appear? It was like Pro Tour Ether Revolt, right? Like, or not even Ether Revolt. It was Pro Tour Kaladesh.
Before that, yeah.
Yeah, and so people have mastered this deck, and they continue playing it and mastering it throughout the time. And I think that this deck gets a lot of its wins that way. And because of that, a lot of its equity comes from people mastering the deck, which is just not true of a lot of the decks in this. In fact, it might be the only deck that gets this in this entire power rankings. Michael, you as somebody who has played Mardu at a Pro Tour, like, what do you think of that?
I still think this deck is pretty good. I think Heart of Kiran gets a little bit worse. In talking about that card specifically, probably the most interesting conversation I had about this specifically with Heart of Kiran and how a braid affects Mardu vehicles is saying, so like before a lot of the time on the draw, you would play Heart of Kiran as your 2-drop to blank your opponent holding up a removal spell. So the idea being that, like, they would hold up Grasp of Darkness or Fatal Push or something, and you, rather than playing like a Scrap Heap Scrounger or a Veteran Motorist, would be able to play Heart of Kiran into that open mana, and now they're forced to either keep it up again or tap out for a spell, and you can whack them with a Heart of Kiran. And a Braid changes, like, the tempo of that a little bit, but I still think just on power level, like, every card in this deck is good. This is not a deck I would hesitate to play.
Okay. Conley, as somebody who's often trying to attack these decks, what are your opinion of Mardu right now?
Mardu to me just seems like the kind of the standard mid-rangey list. Like, I very much agree that it's kind of lost some some inherent raw value points over the last few months, but you can make up for that by being an expert with the deck and playing it really well, because there's so many places where you can gain extra value over somebody who doesn't understand the deck all that well. It's just a very value heavy deck with all kinds of little tricky plays. I think once the meta kind of stabilizes a little bit more, though, you'll see Mardu pick back up in power level a little bit, because it's going to have a more focused sideboard with more options. Just has a great sideboard options being black, white, red. You get so many good things that attack basically anything you want. So once it has an idea of what answers it needs in that sideboard, and it can start properly boarding them in, I think it'll see a little bit of a surge in the future. Yeah, I don't think it's going to be like the best deck ever again necessarily, but it should hang around and kind of keep everyone fair.
One of the, if you look at the deck on your screen, Conley, I'd like to actually ask you about this. It has a 1-of split between Glorybringer and Avacyn, and then it has 1 Abrade, 3 Fatal Push, and then the 4 Unlicenses its removal. Is this deck in confusion because of how the format is? Oftentimes, when you look at a mid-range deck, it, like control decks, is trying to figure out where it belongs in the format, what removal it needs to play. I've often been an advocate for the 1-of Cultivator's Caravan, but it's never been in place of a Heart of Kiran, which is what's happening in this list. What are we too early to make a judgment on Mardu today?
Probably not, because Mardu is if you can make a judgment on some deck, Mardu has to be that deck, right? It's been around for forever. We all know it pretty well. It didn't pick up too many new cards from the new set. It did get impacted via things like Abrade being printed, but for the most part, it is a stable archetype. So if we can't make some judgment of some deck, it feels like this is the one we're going to be able to do that in. But I would say that the lists are certainly not going to be as tuned as they should be, just because people are trying out new things and trying out new configurations. I'm pretty certain that the 1 Glorybringer, 1 Avacyn split is wrong. I don't know what the correct the decision is there, because I have not played or tested this deck enough. Sure. But that would just be really strange to me that would be the correct thing, because both those cards are very powerful and do very different things. And if you can't figure out which one of those you want more, I think that's a mistake. So I think we'll see improvements like that getting made to Mardu as the metagame kind of solidifies.
I completely agree with that. I think that you need to pick a lane here, and the lane can be. Here's the other thing that I think is that I don't think that Abrade is correct. I think that you're either like this cut ribbons Glorybringer deck, or I think you're this Fatal Push Avacyn deck, and I don't think there's an in between, because the mana's already so bad. You can't just push your mana in so many different directions. I know that Cultivator's Caravan helps with that, but it's not enough to help you to the point where you can just do whatever you want.
I think it's more that just Avacyn and Glorybringer pull you a little bit in different directions. I think the mana's mostly fine. The real advantage of Mardu generally is that depending on how you build your sideboard, you really get the ability to go up or down in different matchups. You can become sort of a leaner deck with more cheap removal, or you can become a deck with a bunch of planeswalkers that blanks your opponent's sort of hate cards for the matchup, and is set up to play a longer game. So, I think with Mardu, a lot of the time it just comes down to, more importantly than exactly which cards you play, it comes down to having a cohesive plan. Because it's so much up to you that you really have a lot of control over what your games are going to play out like.
Right.
That's fair. Right. I think you could probably do a little twist to Mardu these days too, where you drop the kind of more aggressive undertones of the deck and you kind of push it up and make it go a little bit bigger, kind of pre-board it, if you will, make it a little more planeswalker heavy, get some fumigate type stuff in there. I think that's like a very viable archetype that people are not exploring as much as they should be. Yeah.
Speaking of that kind of deck, let's go on to our next deck, which is Gearholt Control. So this deck, I included blue-black, blue-red, and Grixis. Blue-black only had one of these decks, let's be clear. I think that UR is the base here, and Gearholt Control coming in with 11 points. Michael, I think this probably surprised you, just from your initial testing of the deck. What are your thoughts here?
I think blue-red was good before, kind of. It was playable before, and it got a bunch of cards. The question is just sort of how everything fits together. And my impression has been that it's a little bit difficult to actually figure out what mix of Torrential Gearhulks, Hour of Devastations, Abrades versus Harnessed Lightnings versus Magma Sprays. You have so many choices, and even though a lot of the cards are similar in a lot of ways, getting the numbers actually exactly right is very difficult.
I actually kind of want to speak to that for a second, because I think this is one of those things where if you hit the right matchups, the Pro Tour is a really good example of this, right? Where players will bring control decks and they'll go do well at this tournament, and they're like, well, I knew what these players that are this specific subset of players were likely to play, so I played this deck to target those players. That might not be the same thing that shows up at your, your Friday Night Magic or your online PTQ or whatever you're playing in. Like, in fact, it's very likely that they're different. So if, let's say, for example, that our team comes up with a control deck, we are not recommending that you play that exact control deck for a given event, because that control deck is meant for a different metagame than what you're expected to play against. Conley, as somebody who worked on Cobblade, you could probably speak to this pretty well.
Oh, I mean, what you're saying is I got flack for this pretty much my entire career, where I always focused on the tournament at hand. I would build for the tournament. I had no intentions of breaking the format as a whole. I could give two craps about that. What I wanted to do was break the tournament. I wanted to show up. I didn't care if the day after, if my deck was solved and everybody could just sideboard for it and beat it. That didn't matter to me. All that mattered was during the tournament, people had no idea what I was doing and that I was attacking the format in the correct way. I would often get complaints for people who were like, I built your deck after you top 16 the Pro Tour, and then I built it on Magic Online. I couldn't win a match. I was like, look, I'm sorry, I did not build this deck for your Magic Online experience after the Pro Tour. I built it specifically for the Pro Tour. But yeah, building for a tournament is very, very different than building for a format. And so I think for a deck like this, like Grixis Control, where so many of the numbers can vary by one or two accounts and the deck changes quite a bit, I think it's better just to know that the archetype as a whole is doing well, and that the specifics, we can debate those with the people that are kind of focused on the archetype and working on it a bunch. But if you're from afar, I don't think you can necessarily just pick one Grixis Control and be like, this is the correct list. You really need to get in there and work on it a whole bunch, because all these numbers, like this deck has 7 draw twos and 4 supreme wills and 2. It just got like a million card draw spells and stuff like that. So it's hard to know how any one card can impact the deck just because you don't know what the hell's going on.
Yeah, and I think that something that you can look at. One thing that people often, I think, what was it, 2 seasons ago, Michael, that I won PPTQ with Jess Guy, where like people were like, oh, I want to win my PPTQ with control deck. Give me your control list. And I'm like, that's great, but like I know what my meta is. I know what like the 200 players that are PPTQ players that come to PPTQs in Salt Lake are. I'm building my control deck for those people. I don't know what the up to 400 players are in your area that are doing PPTQs, and that's the same thing here. Here's the thing that I can tell you. And Gearhulk is bad against Mardu. So if you're gonna build this deck, make sure you have a good Mardu matchup before you jam it. Or at least a 50-50 matchup before you jam it. Second, you have to figure out what your counter spell suite is. Because if you look at the deck on your screen, if I'm not mistaken, it has 0 disallows.
Correct.
Oh no, I'm sorry, it has 2. As 2.
Where are they at?
So it's
I see
it's 2 disallow, 4 supreme. Like, this person made a clear decision as to what they were doing, and this means that they were trying to win the game in a certain time frame. Like, the way that you suite your counterspells between these negates, essence scatters, disallows, like, all of this matters. It's important to what your deck is trying to do. They only have 2 main deck Magma Sprays. Like, this person had an identity as to what they were trying to attack. You have to make those same decisions yourself. If you don't know what you're trying to do, then your deck is kind of a mess. That
Nicol Bolas might be just new toy syndrome. There's a good chance. I don't know if the deck needs Nicol Bolas to finish things out. It's got such a robust late game with just Gear Hulks and Wandering Fumerals ending the game really quickly. I don't know if the main, like, I could totally understand as a sideboard card for specific matchups, but it seems like it might just be like, oh, here's the new shiny toy, let me bust it out.
So my current blue-red list actually has one Jace, one Temur Tower. What's the name? Dynavolt Tower. And like, I actually just think that 7 mana is a lot. And I also think 4 Gearhulks is a lot. Let's be clear, this list is like very top heavy.
Yeah.
And like, this person could be like, I think that people are going to show up with Delirium decks, right? That could be their opinion of this format, and that's why they show up with this very top-heavy deck. But like, you have to make that decision yourself when it comes to control deck. Nobody else can make that for you. Let's go into the number 1 deck because we spent a lot of time on control here. We have Blue-White Monument coming with 17 points. I'd like to go kind of first on this one because this is not a deck that I personally would typically play. There are a few things that I find interesting that we've kind of had discussions about. One of them is the new inclusion of Metallic Rebuke. One of them is the number of Cloud Blazers. And I don't know. Michael, help me here. How is this deck winning? Like, what is this? Like, when I look at this deck, it has a good Mardu.
Do you want me to describe how games look when it's winning, or do you want me to tell you why it might be good?
So, like, it has a good Mardu matchup. It has a good Zombies matchup, right? Like, those are its best matchups.
Your Mardu matchup is kind of sketchy.
No way.
How you win is with... I mean, when you play Oketra's Monument and you went first, your opponents are mostly going to have a bad time.
Hold on. Let's talk about the Mardu matchup, because I'm actually confused here. If this deck, to me, when I think about this deck, it is like this deck that gets to play, that when on the play, gets to play Thraben Inspector, and then you don't get to do anything. Is that not accurate?
I mean, I in my experience, Unlicensed Disintegration, pretty good against all the Spell Queller stuff.
Okay.
Fatal Push is fairly good against this deck. Dusk Dawn is not especially good against Mardu, and this deck is not great against Avacyn.
But how does the Mardu deck beat this go wide strategy that like the deck is trying to implement once it has something like Monument in play?
Well, I mean, first of all, it just doesn't draw Monument plenty of the time. I mean,
that's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, this deck is really good when you draw Oketra's Monument and you get to play it and you're not almost dead on board. It's also really good if Dusk Dawn is good.
Okay.
I mean, if Dusk Dawn is actually just Plague Wind for 4 mana that then rebuys every creature in your deck for 5 mana, like, yeah, that's obviously powerful.
Conley, a lot of pros have moved away from this deck in their articles, in their streams and things like that. Why are the people that on the Pro Tour moving away from this and the SCG players continuing to play it?
I have no idea to that. I mean, blue-white slow, as I call it. We had blue-white flash before. Now we have blue-white slow. That's basically what this deck is. I think it is partially that monument, the variance of the monument that we're talking about. Like, your deck is pretty underpowered without monument. Just on I mean, other decks are playing these exact cards, but then are also playing good stuff alongside it, or Always Watchings, or Gideons, or something. So your monument is effectively that for you. So if your monument is not in your opening hand, or on top of your deck, your opponent doesn't have an Abrade or some other way to deal with it, then sure, your deck operates. But I don't know. I could see people just not wanting. Like, when you play a deck like this, what you're trying to move away from is a variance-heavy list, because this list just does the same thing every game. But except for the fact you have to throw Monument in there, because if Monument is not out, you're no longer having as good a time against Black-Green Energy or against Mardu or whatever it is. So I think that, like, it's a straightforward, simple deck that still has a variance aspect to it, that if you're looking to win consistently, you might just want to shy away from that. But I don't know. I think the deck is fine. It'll probably go down in popularity a little bit here in the coming weeks. I can't imagine it staying as popular as it is right now, just because there are plenty of sideboard cards to be using against this, and I think people will adjust.
Well, when I think about the decks that are good against this deck, I think of things like the Emerge deck, right? I think Control is great against this. I think Ramp's good against this. I mean, when I think about the decks that people are trying to play, right? Like, yeah, okay. So you have you you probably have a really good aggro matchup, which probably will actually inflate this deck's numbers on MTGO as we look at decks going forward. But I mean, there's a reason that the people that even popularize this deck are moving away from it. It is because of the variance and things like Monument. And I would assume that if you took our team's very small sample size, we've got to be 95% against this deck.
I mean, I don't think it's not that high, but
it has to be. I've literally never lost to it, and Matt Kling says he hasn't, and you can't remember the last time you lost to it.
I mean, it depends a lot on the draws, right? If you have Oketra's Monument into Conlor, Militia Captain, Selfless Spirit, yeah, that's really good, and it's really hard to beat.
Here's my thoughts on this, and this might be hyperbole speaking, but there's a reason that the deck cut the. I think there's a reason the deck cut the chaff from the deck, but I also wonder if cutting the chaff from the deck hurt the deck, right? When I think about the times that I've worried about losing this deck, it actually did involve area v area mechanics. It actually did involve these kind of nut draws, right? And I actually think the deck lost its nut draws by going to this very streamlined model.
Maybe. I mean, I still think just in general, if you actually leave Oketra's Monument in play, if you just ignore the games where that card doesn't end up in play, I think it's pretty powerful. I mean, the flip side being that if people are playing Mora Braids, some combination of Mora Braids and more control decks, I don't really know that this is
valuable.
Where I want to be.
Sure. Let's wrap this up. So that's it for the power rankings this week. Those are the decks that you probably need to worry about going into your next event. So be prepared, guys. Let's go right into our training grounds. So we're going to skip deck of the week. We kind of covered the decks more in depth than we typically do. Let's go right into our training grounds, and that is how to brew in a new format. And we want to specifically talk to Conley when we're talking about this. And Conley, you kind of mentioned this at the beginning of the show, but when we look at brewing in a new format, what are the first steps that you take?
So for me, the thing I always want to do is isolate cards that have a very high ceiling, but it is not obvious how to reach that ceiling. So Dream Stealer, I think, is a great example of this since we brought him up earlier, and is a card that I kind of latched onto when I saw this set, and that's because it is fairly cheap. It's a fairly reasonable Magic card. 3 costs, you can get it out. It's not like we're going to Omniscience or something crazy where we have to do craziness. And then so you have this reasonably cheap card who, if it hits without any help, it's a bad Hypnotic Spectre. That's whatever. But if you even give it, let's just say +2/+0, that is on turn 4, your opponent discarding 3 cards, and it is not too crazy to think of a scenario in which those things can line up. You have a creature with menace already, so they can have 1 blocker, and that's fine. They need to have 2 blockers. You can remove it, whatever. You can give your guy trample. There's your flying, whatever, unblockable. There are plenty of situations you can set up. So to me, it seems like a card with an extremely high ceiling, some obvious steps to make it work, and then also a lot of wiggle room up at the top where you can figure out you maybe get double strike. You can maybe try to work it into a control shell where you're trying to flash it back and go long. There's a little bit of variability there. So it's a card that has a lot of promise, but not necessarily it doesn't necessarily put me into a box and make me do one specific thing to make it work. So I love isolating those types of cards. Hour of Eternity is another card, or Godpharaoh's Gift, I guess, is a better example since I'm kind of hot on that right now. The Gate to the Afterlife, Godpharaoh's Gift decks or combinations or whatever, it's so open-ended. There's so many crazy things you could do with it, but they all seem awesome and they all seem like they have some powerful potential behind it. And the reason I like to explore those decks versus the kind of top tier 1 metagame stuff is because, like I said, I expect other people to come up with that tier 1 stuff, and then if I fail and don't come up with anything, I can jump ship and jump right on board one of those decks and play, Blue-White Monument or whatever I want. But if I hit a home run, if I discover some card that I know is being kind of overlooked by the majority of the crowd, and I can make that work, maybe it gets me 1 free tournament win. Maybe I break the format and create a new deck that everybody loves. Whatever it is, at least I feel like I'm doing something novel with my time as a new format comes out. So yeah, I really like to find those cards that, when you see them, you're like, well, there's something about this card. I'm going to make this card work. And then kind of, going from there. Abyssal Persecutor, you brought that up earlier, was one of those cards where it was everyone's kind of ragging on this card, but it's a 4-mana 6/6 flying trample, and the only thing it's asking me to do is to basically sacrifice it before the game's over. Like I feel like I can make that work, you know.
I remember the first national qualifiers tournament that I played in. We had some of the players playing Conley Woods, Abyssal, blue-black control, and it was not that hard to include like Into the Royal and
some
Gatekeeper and Malachor
yeah.
into your control deck. Like you already wanted those effects. Like it just wasn't a big deal. And the fact that like you can single out this effect, right? And this is true of a lot of things. So, for example, I kind of want to talk about Modern for just a second. We had Mason, our executive producer of the show. Why do I keep calling you executive? Shut up, Mason. You're not executive. The technical producer of our show, he brought up wanting to play Prismatic Omens in Volakut because of Hour of Promise. And I was like, Prismatic Omens is terrible. Shut up. And then I thought about it for like 3 more seconds. And I was like, wait a second. If I play a Prismatic Omens and play an Hour of Promise in Volakut, it's literally 18 damage if I have another Volakut in play. And if it's or it's 12. Like on turn 5, 12 damage wherever I want it. And it was like, oh, I'm wrong. Hold on. We need to think about this for a second. And it is understanding the impact of cards that you currently have, as well as the cards that are coming in, right? So Conley mentioned really early on in this episode, the ability to look at something like Invigorated Rampage when you're looking at this Menace creature that makes them discard the hand. If I'm trading an Invigorated Rampage and this 1/2 Menace creature for your entire hand and 2 creatures in play, snap it off. I'll take it. Like I'm getting this what is this, a 7 for 1? Like whatever. I don't care. And it is this kind of thing that is the building blocks for something great.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think looking at cards with high ceilings specifically, right? So if we sort of
like News Constrictor.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, does that mean that sometimes we try some really bad decks? Yes, it does. But it also means that you're pretty confident you're not missing anything great with that card sometimes. You know, so, if you spend some time working on Dreamstealer or whatever, and you really try with this card and you can't get it there, I like the point about being able to switch back to something else, right? You're not locked in. It's not like you are signing up to play the best version of whatever Dreamstealer deck you can build.
Yeah.
If it's bad, you can just say, okay, forget this.
No, like that new. What was the card that was it? Gearpeer Orrery?
Yeah, Gearpeer Orrery.
So like we played this really bad deck, but in this Pro Tour testing, like we played this really bad deck, and I think that it like won the majority of its matches, but we were able to be like, okay, but also it's bad, so don't play it, and that's an important thing to realize. But also in that same Pro Tour Kaladesh, I will beat this drum forever because it's dear to my heart because I won states with the deck. But we had this, we built like a streamlined Aetherworks Marvel deck that basically top-aided the Pro Tour, right? This I think, what was his name, Michael? Who played it? It was at Kaladesh. Who played the Aetherworks Marvel deck in top 8?
Matt Nass top-aided.
Matt Nass, thank you. Top-aided with probably something within like 4 cards of what our first iteration was. We then tried a Delirium version, which was popularized by Jabberwocky months later, that would have been terrible at the Pro Tour, and then ended up on this like rampy, like Ulamog, Drowner of Hope deck that honestly, in my opinion, was quite good for this Pro Tour, and honestly, like quite good in that metagame. And the thing is like, if we hadn't started at the point that everybody else started at, that was like, all right, what can we do to break Aetherworks Marvel? Which is what Danny and Michael did. They wouldn't have ended up on the deck that they played at the Pro Tour. And it's just a long leap. And you have to identify things like, I want to break. I saw Hour of Promise. I was like, this card is great. I want to do this in multiple formats. And because of that, I actually think that I have a better modern deck. I have better standard decks, and you have to do that. The next question we have for you, Conley, though, is, how do you find decks to test against in that new format. So you have identified a card that you want to break, but like, where do you go for the decks to play against?
I mean, these days you can pretty much just get your results from Magic Online so quickly. I mean, the sets are out the day after the pre-release. So if you're talking about testing before a set's out, you're probably testing for a Pro Tour or something like that, and you probably have a team to help you out. You probably have a good grasp on what the metagame was. You could have those decks proxies and stuff. I think you'll figure it out if you're in that situation. But if you're just a random person and you need to know what kind of what the gauntlet should look like, if you just wait. Even that Wednesday, I think Wednesday after the set was out online, everyone kind of already had an idea what was going on. We knew at least what decks were going to be kind of in the spotlight. Blue-White Monument had already been seen at least. Maybe it wasn't as good as it is now or whatever. But like all these different decks are kind of like they pop up really quickly. And it's a little weird with the way Wizards is handling their Magic Online deck lists these days. But you still have Star City results. You have streamers. There's so much data out there that if you really are interested in figuring out what the metagame looks like before you can actually play it because you need to get the decks or whatever, you just go do your research, jump on some forums, whatever you need to do. It's all there as long as you spend some time and go find it.
When you look at some of your Pro Tours, like I think that you ended up on the last Pro Tour that I really remember you trying to make a huge impact in is the modern one where you played the Knight of the Reliquary deck. But even before that, when you were on the Fireball teams, like how did you guys identify or try and guess what the metagame was going to look like?
So, I mean, there's always some cards that are really low-hanging fruit that you just know are going to be built around, that are going to be, like, for example, zombies previous to the last Pro Tour. It's, like, pretty obvious people are going to show up with zombies. It's all about figuring out what the best version of that deck is, figuring out what people might going to be sideboarding. So you start off with some stock lists that you find on some forum somewhere, or maybe somebody in your group is a zombies fan and builds it, and then you go from there and you just try to make that list better and better. Now it is sometimes difficult to guess what the more rogue strategies are going to be, the more kind of out of left field stuff, and sometimes you'll just get beat by something at the Pro Tour that was not on your radar. That happens, but generally speaking, if more than, let's say, 2% of the field is playing it, you probably had an idea that deck existed just because of the previous metagame before the Pro Tour came out, your reports from your teammates, reports from your friends, and everything like that. So I really, I don't think figuring out what decks are going to be there is too big of an issue. I think that I think it's mostly about sitting down and actually working on I think that basically what I think is that it's kind of an excuse to not be putting in work when you're like, oh, I don't know what the format's going to be looking like, so what should I be doing? It's like you could be working on proactive decks. That's something you can always do. It's irrelevant what the format's working on. You could be working on your own proactive decks, and then if the decks you're testing against don't end up being the real thing, at least they still put pressure on you, put a clock on you, whatever. There's plenty of value you can gain when you're not testing against the best tier 1 decks because you don't know what those are. I think that, like I said, just give it a little bit of time and that stuff's going to fall into place anyway.
Michael, anything on that?
I think that makes sense. And I think that, just understanding that some of it already exists, you might not know what everyone's going to play, but it's not like you don't know any of the decks. And if you can sort of come up with decks that at least are good against some of what you expect, right? You don't have to be able to guess 100% of the field to be able to say, I think this deck is good against mono red, and I think that's important.
When I think about our biggest mistake from Pro Tour Kaladesh, right? Like when we really try to focus on testing, right? We were like, what would be great? What if we could play all of the great 1-drops and do this? And then we kind of dismissed it, right? Where we had this idea that ended up being great, and then we dismissed it, and it ended up being the best aggro deck at the Pro Tour. And this thing, one of the things that when we looked back on that Pro Tour was I wish that we had tried to perfect more decks, right? What were we doing during this time when we were just trying to figure out how to beat the mirror and blah, 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 and blah, 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 when we could have been well, let's explore this thing. Can we actually make a deck that makes this work? And Mardu is the perfect example of that, where it's we specifically missed trying to make vehicles work because we tested this terrible white-red vehicles deck that did well at the SCG, and we're well, this deck is bad. It is so bad. And then Michael goes behind. I actually remember we were in my living room, and Michael's like, well, what if we just play all of the 1-drops? Like, all of them. What if we just do that? And I was like, yeah, your mana is bad. Don't even try it. And then the deck top 8's the Pro Tour. Like, you have to be willing to put in work on every single type of thing that you're trying to do if that's your goal, right? We're not talking about winning your FNM. We're not talking about winning your PPT. We're saying, like, in the beginning of a format, here's what you have to do, and then there's layers upon that you get building blocks because of the other work that other people have put in, which is kind of what Conley's talking about, right? Where it's like, you have this data, use this data to test against X and to build your decks accordingly, right, Conley?
Yeah, you don't have to have your whole gauntlet built on day one. Like,
right.
And remember, when new formats come out, it's not like everything got obliterated. You have, like, when, for example, this new set came out, we know Mardu vehicles exist because it existed 3 months ago and because it existed 6 months ago, and it didn't lose anything. So even if it's not the best deck, that's a place we can start testing against. If I have some idea for a wacky combo deck and the only deck I could play against is Mardu, but I'm beating the hell out of it, that probably means my combo deck has some legs, and I should probably start testing against more against the field. If it's getting beaten the crap out of by Mardu, maybe I can't rule it out completely because maybe I need to explore it more. But it's still a data point. It's still testing that you can get done. Zombies we know existed, for example. And maybe this format shakes things up less than like an entire block rotation where you're losing a ton of stuff. But in any of those cases, you're still going to have an idea of what some of the tribal decks are. There's going to be some blue control deck that's playing a sweeper. Like, these things exist. Even if your lists are bad, they're going to be giving you feedback, and that's all you need is some amount of feedback to start with.
Well, and I think part of the hope, too, and one of the things that I certainly felt like I really learned trying to test for some of these Pro Tours in the past is that sometimes in the decks that you're building that you're not sure are real, like, you say, oh, there's a blue control deck with a sweeper, right? So you start with some list there, but those lists get better quickly too. Just playing games, even with the decks that aren't your main focus, you sometimes develop interest in them or decide, hey, maybe this is better than I thought it was, or if we change this and this looks pretty good. And one of the things is that, if you work on improving all of the decks in your gauntlet to some degree, right, you end up just with a better feeling for what the matchups actually look like and for what decks are good.
This is so true. And one of the things, like, I think I've told the story before. So for Pro Tour Origins, one of the things that happened we had a team of like 7 or 8 people, and one of the things that we did is, like, we developed these, like, we actually did the opposite of what we did for Pro Tour Kaladesh, where, like, we tried to, like, identify, like, the best version of each deck. But what ended up happening is, like, we doubted ourselves. So, like, we had this blue-black control deck that played Ugin and Mage Ring Network. And we were like, yeah, but, like, this is so weird. Like, there's no way this is actually good. And then we dismissed it. The Pro Tour after that, redo top-8 with a Mage Ring Network Ugin deck. And, like, I felt like the biggest idiot in the world. I was like, I had this deck 2 Pro Tours ago, and it crushed Green Red Devotion, which is the deck I played at the Pro Tour. And like, kind of what Michael's saying is that if you don't explore every option, like, you just kind of miss out. Now, you might not have every option, and that's kind of where what Conley's saying comes into play, right? Where it's like, I have all of this data anyway. Let's just play against these decks, see if my deck is good, and then move on. Because if it's not good, I'm going to know pretty quickly. Speaking of which, Conley, let's talk really quick about Conley cards, because I think this is something that people have a pretty. So I've talked a little bit about Abyssal Persecutor, Acidic Slime. What is a card? What I mean, I think you might have even covered this in the beginning of the segment, but, like, what makes a card that Conley wants to go at?
Like I said, definitely high ceilings. That's always kind of number one. I like a lot of interaction points and a lot of, like, versatility out of my cards. So, a card like Glorybringer, I know I'm going to play it at some point. I know it's a good Magic card there, but at the same time, you know exactly what you have in a Glorybringer. It's going to be a Glorybringer. It's going to be a Glorybringer every single time. I like cards that give me some options, give me some tools, both when deck building and in playing, that can kind of wiggle me out of a situation or even get me into a situation that most people would not be comfortable in. Because one of the ways that I kind of approach Magic is if I put people into situations that they are not familiar with, they make mistakes. And ultimately, the end goal of competitive Magic should be to make less mistakes than your opponent, or make less severe mistakes, or whatever you want to call it. So if you're giving your opponent more options to walk into mistakes without those same options being presented to you, you give yourself more opportunities to win. Now, you can't be playing a terrible deck and doing that, because you're costing yourself more by playing the terrible deck than you are by gaining the mistakes that they're walking into. So you need to make sure your list is good. But I always kind of seek out those decks where it's like my opponent's like holding his head. He's like, I don't know. One time I played against Tomohiro Saito. Actually, it was my first ever Grand Prix. And I was playing a Trash for Treasure deck in Extended that was I had worked on for 4 months. I had Cloud Posts and Vesuvas before that was a thing. Everyone was playing like Zoo and Destructive Force and all these normal like extended decks. And I show up with my Trash for Treasure, Mind Slaver, Sundering Titan, Ridiculousness. My first ever Grand Prix. I'd never even gone to a PTQ prior to that. And I show up and I'm doing pretty well. I ended up getting 10th, missed out on top 8 on breakers. So I did pretty well. But in day 2, I played against Tomohiro Saito, who he makes a play in where he basically ghost quarters his own land looking for a plains. And then he turns out, I'm pretty sure he just didn't have a plains in his deck and he just forgot his list, but he maybe boarded out or something. But he searches his deck like 3 or 4 times and then like slaps himself on the head and he says, "You break my brain." And that was like my favorite moment, because like I was playing this weird deck with all this weird stuff. I just cast a Factor Fiction that had like 5 really strange cards in it. He stared at him for like 10 minutes and he was like, all right, he ghost quarters his own land to go get a plains for a Path to Exile to take out something. And then he just doesn't have a plains in his deck. So he just straight up double strip mined himself, leaves himself with no lands available. And then he just like tells me that I break his brain and then he concedes the match or whatever. And I was like, that's kind of what I want to get at in every game of Magic. Obviously, maybe not to that extent, but I really like putting my opponent against the ropes and seeing if they know how to respond. And often they don't, just because people don't explore those wacky, lesser known things.
So locally, I am known as like this player that loves to play ramp decks. And back in 2012, you won a Grand Prix with green-black Wolf Run.
Yep.
And I got a lot of questions about your deck list. And
okay.
It's so funny because when you talked about how you build your deck to win certain events, I was a huge fan of the A-Team early on in my Magic career. You actually did a podcast about green-black Wolf Run when you won that Grand Prix. You told people not to play the deck, that it was specifically built for that event. They still played it, lost a bunch. So it's so funny that you mentioned that on this podcast. It kind of brought my Magic career like full circle. I like remember my first States top 8 with Green Red Wolf Run. People being like, "Well, Conley just won this GP with Green Black. What do you think of that?" I'm like, "Yeah, don't play that. Like, don't do that." And then you went on a podcast the next week and you were like, "Do not play my Green Black Wolf Run deck list."
I said that, and then the very next Pro Tour, I can't remember his name, but a Japanese player ended up top 8ing the Pro Tour with like 2 cards off of my list. So it was like it went through a slump where it wasn't playable, and then 3 months later it was a good deck again and top 8 the Pro Tour.
So obviously when I'm looking at this deck list, I see things that are like. So first of all, for those who don't know, Wolf Run is a card that gives your creature trample, and it requires green and red mana. So it was really a Jund deck because of the lands. But Conley, what brings you to like this decision to go so far out from the norm? Like you see something like Green Black Wolf Run, or you see something like Green Red Wolf Run, and you're like, you know what's really great right now? Grave Titan and Gisela. I want to do that instead.
So it was a little bit different than that. It was mostly that we had this Titan of the format, which was Delver. Blue-white Delver was everywhere. It was 40% of the field. It was much worse than pretty much any standard deck outside of Marvel that you probably have seen if you're a newer player. It was very, very dominant and really annoying and had a lot of good matchups.
Also, let's be clear, this is before Hunt Matchup Fells existed. So you actually just couldn't jam green-red and have a good matchup. You actually had a bad matchup before this.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing is it had a pretty bad matchup for a couple reasons. One, Inferno Titan coming down and getting Vapor snagged turned out to not be that good because most of the blue-white creatures had hexproof, so you couldn't kill them anyway. So Inferno Titan wasn't as good as it should be. Red Sweepers were not as good as they necessarily should have been, and you ultimately just didn't have a lot of good interaction points, and you generally just lost that matchup. But you were such a good deck that people still played green-red in other places. So I basically looked at what I could do to improve those specific things. I was like, well, if Inferno Titan coming down and getting Vapor Snagged is being Bound Spectre hand by a Vapor Snag is bad, what would be good in that spot? I was like, oh, a Grave Titan leaves behind 2/2/2s. That's pretty good against
Guys to Saint Draft.
A Guys to Saint Draft and whatever that wants to come in. So I'm like, that seems like a decent place to start. I was like, Black Sun Zenith is a thing that leaves permanent -1/-1 counters on things, even if it doesn't kill them, gets around hexproof, etc. There was playing the Glissa was Ratchet Bomb was just a card I wanted to play anyway, and Brian Kibler actually suggested the interaction with Glissa, and I was like, oh, okay, and I put it in my deck. But I literally showed up to that tournament without testing a single game with that deck. And I have done that multiple times in my career where I've played in a Pro Tour and gotten 20th without playing a single game. Because for me, it's not necessarily about playing the games. Those obviously help very much. But if you have enough data and if you are able to theory craft enough and work through lines and you start with kind of from a good position, you can craft a deck using that information without actually ever playing. Playing will validate it. It will give you the feedback necessary to go, hey, you were correct on this, and now you can go play that in a tournament or whatever. But it's not 100% necessary if you take the time to kind of craft things out. So like I said, from that spot, it was mostly like, here's this deck that I definitely want to beat. Here's this deck that kind of exists. Is there anything I could do to this deck to tweak it? And it turned out tweaking in this case was removing an entire color from the deck and then adding the other color. But I still wanted to keep the Ink Moth Nexus Wolf Run interaction, so I left that and sure. a couple like Ancient Grudges, I think, were the only other red cards. But yeah, for the most part, it was just about figuring out that, hey, the way people are playing this deck is inefficient, and it's not good in the metagame right now, and I think there's a way to make it efficient. Even when I first came up with the idea, somebody wanted me to play 4 Wormcoil engines in the deck instead of Grave Titans, and I was like, that completely misses the point. I was like, I want something behind when they Vapor Snag, and I was given the luxury of making those decisions because of how prevalent Delver was. Like, you can't always do that.
This was 5 years ago, and you somehow remember that the only red card in your entire 75 was Ancient Grudge.
Yeah, well, I mean,
it was a one of. I have the deck list in front of me. It was a one of Ancient Grudge. Good. So I want to wrap this up really quick because you've mentioned a few things that you go to brew, and so Conley, let's be open about something. So you are not currently a pro Magic player.
Sure.
If I'm not correct. But that doesn't mean that your thoughts on things aren't something that people should respect. One of the things that I really find frustrating is that when I look back on Magic history, people have very big recency biases. And when I was becoming, when I was trying to win Magic tournaments, like Conley Woods was top-ending Worlds, and he was like the brewer. Like, it was him and Ollie Antrazi were like the brewers, and they didn't lose that, right? Like, that's a mindset that they have. So when they say something, it's because they believe something. The reason that Ollie has consistent success on the SCG tour is because he continues to play on it. Conley has a full-time job right now, and he's made life decisions that are taking him a little bit away from Magic, but that doesn't mean that what he's saying isn't true. So Conley, with that in mind, I want you to answer, like, when you go to brew a deck, when you go to make a decision at the beginning of the format, what are the resources you're going to? You've mentioned MTGR results, you've mentioned Gather. What are those things? Like, how do people find them?
So for me, Magic Online is really, really important for me, and I've really enjoyed the changes just because actually being able to visualize decks in front of me, the way Magic Online does it is very helpful in terms of like seeing curves and stuff like that. It just makes it a lot easier to process. I mean, back in the day, when we had to write everything in a notebook or whatever during a college class, that was fine too, and I would be able to parse it to some degree, but it's so much quicker and easier when you have everything laid out. So I think Magic Online or some program to visualize your decks is very, very helpful. I would definitely recommend finding if I were you, I would read authors you don't already read or watch streams you don't already watch. And you don't have to do that forever, but diversify a little bit and just kind of seek out some things you wouldn't normally seek out, because I think that you can very quickly have a change in the kind of player you are by adapting a mentality that you don't know exists. And if you see somebody else with that mentality, maybe it's a mulligan, maybe some way that they mulligan, or some way that they build decks, or some way that they draft, or whatever it is, and you see this person bring this new perspective they just didn't know existed, and you're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, and kind of clicks. For me, when I became kind of pro, it was just reading everything. There wasn't a lot of videos at the time, but I was just read as much as I could. And a lot of articles I would walk away from it going, I think that sucks. I disagree with that guy here and here and here. But it was important that I at least got his viewpoint or her viewpoint, because then I was able to kind of understand that other players were looking at the game the way this person was. So even if I personally didn't appreciate what they were doing, I could kind of see the other angles and then use some empathy or whatever and put myself in my opponent's shoes and kind of play a match of Magic better and more holistically, just because I kind of see from different angles. So I would say that find some authors that you enjoy, but then also just get on Twitter, follow some people you don't normally follow, watch some streams you don't normally watch, and just kind of explore. I think it's very underutilized right now in Magic. I think people are a little too hive-mindy, and they fall into groupthink a little too quickly. We saw it with the bans almost. Like, you basically saw mob mentality getting those bans to go through, and it happened time and time again. And maybe some of them were deserved, maybe some of them weren't. But it just feels like if we had some people who were putting that energy into brewing new decks and coming up with stuff that other people weren't, maybe the format could have actually been solved and we wouldn't have had to. There was some stuff Marvel need to be banned. Reflector Mage, probably not. Come on, Reflector Mage does not need to be banned.
Oh man,
right now it'd be annoying as hell, though. To be fair, with that stupid monument deck.
I think that we're pretty close here. I think that basically, I have no idea why Smuggler's Copter is banned at this point, because
so sad. That card was amazing. That was one of the best designed cards, I thought, from them. Games of Magic were awesome. It doesn't win the game quickly. It loot. I thought that card was excellent. I thought Heart of Kieran would have balanced it pretty well, where now you have this back and forth thing. You also you can't run both cards necessarily, because they kind of fill in the same role, so maybe you can run 6 of it. I think Thought Things would have been great if Thopter was still around, but unfortunately...
If you need an online testing team, I'm starting one. And I'd love to get you trying to get both of us back on the Pro Tour together. So.
I'm making a little bit. I mean, I've been streaming a lot more recently and brewing a lot. I've been writing for Star City and have articles that are going up there and stuff. So I'm definitely inclined to get back on the tour. I don't know if I'll ever go as headstrong as I was before, just because I am a little older and I do have jobs and stuff like that. But plenty of other Magic players have kind of done this model before. We've seen John Finkel do it. I've seen Kibler do it. So I'm pretty certain that at some point here in the near future, I'll be working back on the tour.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Conley. I don't think that we could. I think that the clear lesson here is to keep an open mind. We kind of talked about it a lot throughout this episode, where we talked about it during our always improving moment, right? Where it's like, when you're watching Magic, watch for the right reasons. Don't watch to correct people. Watch to learn something, because that mindset is so different. And I think that if there's anything that I've learned from Michael in his time playing Magic, is he's making his way up the chain. Hopefully gold. If you're not gold, you're fired, Michael. No, I'm just kidding. But I think that I'm just kidding.
Pressure. Yeah,
I'm
no
so
pressure.
kidding. I'm just kidding. Please don't take that seriously. But if there's anything you can learn from Michael specifically, it's always being willing to listen to the person next to you. I have a huge always improving moment for myself, and for two things. And I kind of want to talk about them on this podcast. And I think that keeping an open mind is really important on this. One of them is, I personally am a really defensive person. So this week, Michael sent a message in a Facebook chat that was that I think the exact quote was green red is bad, and I took it as green red ramp is bad. And I was like, well, it has a good matchup against this, and this, which are the top decks of this week, and blah, 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 blah. And Michael was like, yeah, I was saying that it was bad for the deck we were talking about, Spencer. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm an idiot right now. Ignore me. And one thing that I really respect about Michael that I've kind of talked about on this show multiple times is we were at GP San Jose. He asked me about draft. We know the 3-0 is next draft. qualifying for the RPTQ, he like went and talked to me before the draft, before his top 8 draft to like qualify him for his next Pro Tour. And like, Michael is just the epitome of keeping an open mind. And when you're in a position like Michael, where you're getting better and better and better at Magic as time goes on, it's really easy to become. I think I actually said this to you this week, Michael, was like, why are you so jaded? And it's so easy to get jaded in Magic the Gathering as you get better. And I think that if there's anything we can learn from Conley and from Michael and from my experience in Magic, it's like, don't get jaded. Like, accept the fact that somebody might know something you don't know, and accept that you might know something they don't know, and try and build on that and improve. So, yeah. Thank you so much to each of our patrons. If you go to patreon.com/ccmtg, become a patron of $1 more per month. Anything you see fit is really appreciated. Like I said before, if everybody listening to the show just donated $1 per month, it would legitimately change our lives, and it would mean the world to us. Where can people find you guys? So, Conley, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Conley81. Also on Twitch, Conley81. I have an Instagram you can find, a YouTube channel you can find where I put up dance videos. No Magic stuff yet, although I'm probably going to start taking some stream adaptations and putting on YouTube. So follow my Twitter for that, and I'll announce that in the future. But yeah, then I also write weekly for StarCityGames.com.
Did you just move from TCG Player? Because weren't you on there before?
I wrote for TCG Player until the end of last year. For 8 years for them in total. And then, I just started at Star City a couple months ago.
Cool. Well, we're really excited for that. Michael, where can people find you?
You can find me on Facebook. My name is Michael Hinderocker. You can find me on Twitter at MagicMikeMTG.
You can find me on Facebook at Spencer Stephen Hallen. You can find me on Twitter at Spencer13H. You can find the podcast every week anywhere you can find basically any podcast. We did separate the podcast, so now there's a limited time only feed, a constructive criticism feed, and there's just a feed for everything in our network. So if you haven't left a review for each of those and you've listened to them, please do leave a review. It means the world to us. It actually really does help, because like once you get X number, I don't know how to explain it to you. If you leave a review, it's really helpful, and it means the world to us. You can join the conversation by going to the Constructive Criticism Facebook group, which is the Constructive Criticism family. If you're a patron of $5 a month, you get to join the Constructive Critics group, which is a group where we share deck lists, early access to things. This Pro Tour is a little rough, as we mentioned earlier, but we're doing our best. It's a tough format. You can join the Discord channel, which I'm in every day, and I'll be in even more now that I'm starting this online testing group. You can join the clan by messaging me at Spencer13H on Spencer13Dev on MTGO. And you can tweet at us with hashtag would that be good. Hashtag would that be good is our Twitter outreach program. If you tweet it, we'll read it, as Michael likes me to say. Oh man, I'm so excited for this one. You have no idea. I believe all of these are from. Oh, I have to do my latest. This is going to be great. Ew, that's the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. All right. Okay. All right, let's do this. Where do we start here, Michael? What's the date?
Let's see. It's the 17th today, because it's my birthday tomorrow.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. It says, Mason tweets, "The world needs your thoughts." And it is cereal with ice cubes.
Conley, you can go first. Would you put ice cubes in your cereal?
Would I, or would I enjoy doing so? I would if you were like, I'm killing your dog if you don't put, sure, I'll put some ice in my cereal. I don't think I'll prefer ice in my cereal. I don't know why.
So to be clear, that's the level it would have to rise to.
Yeah, I don't
think. Puppy? That seems so aggressive.
I don't want water in my cereal, so I would want ice in my cereal. That sounds like my cereal.
Apparently this video is a bunch of people who have never tried it, and they're like, I don't know why I haven't done this. I feel like, here's my opinion. If cereal already gets soggy really fast, so if I'm eating it slow enough that it's not cold anymore, it means that I'm eating my cereal incorrectly, and that's just wrong.
I have no idea. This is weird. I don't know why we're putting ice cubes in cereal.
Don't.
At
Yeah,
CCM.
it's that hive mind again. Don't do it.
And RSS feed for each show feels cumbersome. Do I smell an always improving podcast network incoming hashtag with good? Yes, you do. I feel like we're going to 3 podcasts. It is not unlikely that one day we get to more. I don't want everyone to have to listen to every podcast. If you're a limited player, I want you to be able to listen to limited time only. If you're a constructed player, I want you to be able to listen to relevant formats.
You could do both, right? I mean, you could have
both are available.
and,
Yes,
yeah.
So you can listen to every podcast on one RSS feed, or you can subscribe individually. But yes, that is the reason. So, Dylan, you are correct. It is because we hope one day to have more podcasts.
Also, if you want to be the best Magic player, you should be playing all formats, or at least both limited and constructed. I think they both help you improve at the other one.
I agree completely. I don't know how much he uses it, but when you find the perfect Twitter handle for your son, you grab it at Jackalpup. So Eric tweeted this, and his son's name is Jack. You might have seen him in GP coverage, and I thought that was great. And I will find a Magic-related Twitter handle for my son soon. And
just reserve it.
Yeah.
Just make sure that he never feels like he's missing out.
Yeah, I don't know what Maxwell will get, but Intuition, Lone, Cabal Therapy, Blood Gas, Wastelands, Academy Ruins, Engineer Explosives. Hashtag would that be good? Conley, I'm going to let you handle this one. I don't know what's going on here.
That sounded like a lot of things. Maybe. I don't know. I think in Modern there's a high bar. Like you.
Cabal Therapy is definitely not Modern.
Was Cabal Therapy in there? That's Legacy.
And Wasteland.
I don't know that. I don't know.
And Intuition. I mean, Ruglands is already a deck. People already sometimes play Intuition and Academy Ruins.
Intuition's
just already. That's already a thing people do, but I don't know that you want Blood Gas. It's like you can just make 20/20s. It's so much better.
That was my initial thought. I was like thinking about this color combination. I was like, can't you just like kill them the next turn? Do you have to do all of this?
Yeah, I mean, Intuition for like Loam Dark Depth stage is like, right?
Well, this is me, and this is embarrassing. I'm sure I'm drunk when I tweeted this, but nothing pumps me up like Pokemon theme songs. Hashtag would be good. Actually, I was
gonna say I'm gonna read your timestamp if you're not careful.
I was not drunk.
Isn't there only one Pokemon theme song?
No, there's a lot. So to be fair, I think the ones that pump you up the most are actually not the original. I think Born to be a Winner, which is the third one, is actually the one that pumps me up the most. Let's move on. The entire CCMTG crew is awesome. Literally the best human beings ever. Thank you at Spencer13H, at Magic Mike NPG, hashtag would that be good. So there's a story behind this, and I'm terrible. So Andrew's mother is actually going through chemo right now and is living in not the best living conditions. And we are actually using our Patreon money to donate some fans and some food to Andrew's mother. I'll do that right after this podcast. I promised to do it this weekend. I actually didn't get to it. But nobody should be living in those conditions. We don't need all the money that's coming in to us from the Patreon, and helping one of our listeners out is really important to us. I already talked to Michael about it. He's approved it. And Andrew, we hope that we can help out your mother, and we hope that her living conditions could get a little bit better. So, yeah. Andrew also says Steel Pool is great. Scarab fixing aggressive creatures, time to win a PPTQ. He then went 1-0, 2-0, 2-1, and didn't tweet again. I take it, Andrew, you did not win this PPTQ.
Yeah.
At Ruben says, or at Does It Resolve says, at CCMTG, how playable is Solemnity? It is a cyber card against green-black energy, teamer energy, and UR control. Hashtag would that be good? So I watched somebody lose to this in Modern this weekend.
Was it with Phyrexian on live?
No, it was not. But it was
cool.
this like mono white enchantment deck in Modern. Conley, this might be a U card. Is Solemnity good enough?
As a card, yeah, I definitely think it is. I think that there's some. I mean, you can use it as just a hate card, right? That does exist. Like there is some use against affinity and stuff like that. I don't know if it will ever be consistently good like the way Stony Silence is, but then it is also a combo card. There's plenty of there's plenty of weird stuff you could do. Phyrexian Life you just mentioned is one of them. Dark Depths is another one. So like there's stuff you could do with this
that's
card.
interesting.
Yeah, you could just play Dark Depths and trigger it.
Does that so actually played against? It was actually on Moto. Somebody was like, two Thing of the Next turned to Solemnity, and they were like, "Why didn't this work?"
Was it Solemnity and Thing in the Ice? I think Solemnity has to be in play first.
It does, and they were like raging, and I was like, "Yeah, that doesn't work the way you think it does."
That's cool though. I mean,
if they played it in the reverse order, but they would actually still have to play another spell, which is what he did next. He played another Thing in the Ice. He's like, it still didn't flip. I'm like, yeah, because it's a triggered ability. You have to play a spell to try and remove a counter. If it has 0, it will then.
What I'm learning here is you got to stop walking your opponents through, how to flip their Thing in the Ices, because that seems like mostly a bad strategy.
No. I won that match very easily. What is the Patreon goal for Spencer to eat this? # with the good. # Mason is a monster. That's true. And it is a picture of pineapple underneath a slice of pizza.
Well,
because it's an entire pineapple underneath a slice of pizza.
Well, reverse order, but
$1 million.
You're not a pineapple fan?
I think that basically putting pineapple on your pizza should be capital punishment.
All right, show's over. I gotta go. I can't be associating with the likes of you. Pineapple's the greatest thing ever.
This is a lot of pineapple, to be fair.
Do you want me to send you this, Conley?
No,
this is more pineapple than pizza.
It's a significant amount of pineapple.
I used to tell people that I would eat pineapple off of a car bumper that I didn't know where it came from. Off of pineapple used to be the thing that kept me alive. I would roll out of bed in the morning. I would go pineapple, and then I would go on with my day.
All right, 615 soft # would that be good? All right, there's a story behind this, and I think it's important, so I'm going to tell it. So Nashville is a place where PPTQs happen, and Mason and Andrew, 2 of our listeners, are one of our producers here. They had a problem similar to Utah. Where it was like, I'm going to go to Nashville to go and crush these RPTQs because you guys suck. And so what happened is Mason got together a group of like 20 players, and they were like, F that, isn't crushing us. And so they're trying to come up with shirts for this group of people that are like these local Nashville grinders that are like trying to improve so that people don't feel like it's a soft tournament anymore. And so I came up with a shirt that was a shirt that gave their area code, which is 615, and then it said 615 soft, and then on the back it edited the definition of the word soft. So instead of saying, whatever the definition of soft is, I don't know what that is, it said a chance to improve as the definition. So it kind of looked like a dictionary, and apparently Andrew had a problem with that, and screw you, Andrew, that shirt is sweet. If I was a Nashville player, I would buy that shirt. Doing the podcast right now, which is great, but hometowns on Bachelor ABC, so I can't watch hometown dates. # would be good. Mason, you are currently producing a podcast. Stop worrying about The Bachelor.
You could just unequivocally say stop worrying about The Bachelor.
Conley agrees. He just shook his head so hard.
I don't know they need to qualify it.
I mean, you got Game of Thrones to worry about. I don't know why we worry about The Bachelor, but...
Oh, that was a great episode. I enjoyed this week's episode. Michael, what did you learn this week?
I think just listening to Conley talk a little bit about kind of prepping for early format events and preparing with the information that you currently have, even if it's not complete information, resonated with me.
Conley, did you learn anything this week on this podcast?
I did. I learned that I cannot associate with you in your pineapple hating ways. No, I actually did. I learned a little bit about some of the new standard decks. You guys are pretty on top of everything, which I found refreshing, and I'm excited. I got some brews in the back corner that I'm excited to bust out. And you guys mentioned some of the cards in them. I'm like, Scrap Trawler. Get your eyes on Scrap Trawler for standard. It's coming.
I learned a lot. I learned that I did not realize how much Conley influenced my early Magic career. And then I remembered the times that people were like, your green-red deck sucks. Tell me how to play Conley's deck. And I realized this as I was looking through Conley's results. So thanks, Conley, for all those Facebook messages I got.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you guys all next week.
Thanks.